All right, click the links. Odyssey, Bit Chute, join this channel, become a valued member, or join the subscribe star. Thank you for the recent memberships over there, or join Telegram and Gab. Those are free speech platforms, so be forewarned. If you're a pussy, you're probably not going to enjoy those things. So I agree with John Leguizamo. I hope that's how it's pronounced. I mean, it really doesn't matter. Anti-Latino Hollywood. And isn't, now that I think about it, isn't James Franco the guy who was sodomizing his fellow actresses, which, you know, like, was it consensual? Because if it was, like, why do people come out years later and go, I have this relationship? It's like, yeah, but it was consensual, wasn't it? Oh, right. I guess you forgot that part. Anyway, so I'm in agreement with this guy he's a nut job, but it doesn't mean they're always wrong on every point. It's a big Hollywood club, Latinos, and you're definitely not in it. And it's surprising how little attention this gets. Hollywood has such little respect for Latinos or Europeans that they will constantly replace them in movies. If you don't advance for your own tribe, you'll get left behind. The only way to fix it is for form unions or guilds for your tribe. Otherwise, you're just not going to get those roles. Eventually, you're going to come to the realization that you got to form identity groups and maybe even make movies within those groups. Hire your own tribe for in front of and behind the camera. There's a lot of people who work on a movie, you know, from sound to lights to setting. If you act as an individual in Hollywood, you're not going to get anywhere. You have to form identity groups and advance your own interests. And I don't know, up until recently, that made a lot of people uncomfortable, but now people are starting to kind of come around to the only logical conclusion. Identity politics have taken over America, most people are coming to that realization. So if you're Latino or European in Hollywood, you're going to have to form your own identity groups to get ahead. It's sort of a new way of thinking for a lot of people, but it's just game theory 101. You simply don't have any power as an individual. So what happened was James Franco, who's a much more well-known actor, even if he did sodomize his co-workers, whatever he did, than John Leguizamo, who's kind of known for B movies and C movies. And he got this role at playing Fidel Castro, which I'm sure will be absolutely freaking horrible. Unless they made it a comedy, that might work. And he's not Spanish, I guess. So John Leguizamo's like, why wouldn't you just hire a Spanish actor? There's so many of them looking for roles. And yeah, I totally agree with him. You start thinking like, wait a minute, how come there's not a whole lot of well-known Latino actors in Hollywood? It's like, well, yeah, Hollywood's been discriminated against them for a long time. You could go to Mexico or any other Spanish-speaking country and find a well-established actor who looks the role and fits the age range. You wouldn't have the name recognition of Franco, but it would be like diversity, inclusion, and equity, Hollywood. Like, what happens to that? Oh, yeah, not really. Not so much. Not when it means that you might disenfranchise someone who's in the club, and James Franco is definitely in that club. So John Leguizamo has a point, but he's a hypocrite. Obviously, welcome to Hollywood. Almost everyone in Hollywood's a hypocrite. He played the role of that Italian plumber. I mean, he plays those kind of roles, and he played not Spawn. I think he was in that. He didn't have that many serious roles, and then he took these non-serious roles to pay the rent. It's like you kind of get like you think of him as playing these stupid roles, and it sucks because he was in that one serious movie. What was that? The East Coast, that 44 caliber thing. I forget the name of that movie. He was in that, and he played a crazy guy. It's like he'd probably be a pretty good Castro, playing someone who's kind of a sociopath, obviously. And it's maybe slightly paranoid and slightly, I don't know, so just kind of weirdo. It's like he'd probably do that role pretty well. So yeah, it is. He doesn't have the name recognition. It's like it does seem hypocritical of Hollywood because it is obviously hypocritical of Hollywood. Some people matter more than others, and he's not going to like if Leguizamo doesn't speak up when Europeans are swapped out for Africans, which is sort of my point. People are tribal. They only care about their tribe. Maybe in the future you'll see Hollywood split off into its own factions. That would be interesting. And I mean, like how long are you going to continue to get kind of like left behind before you start realizing like, oh, it's time to kind of tribe up? And it's like, oh no, you guys can't do that. Well, everyone else is. Oh, Yeah, you don't really have a counter argument when everyone else is doing the thing that they tell you yourselves can't do. It's like, at some point, like, you have the numbers to form your own, like, subsidiary Hollywoods or alternative Hollywoods where you're employing each other. The thing is, there's no other way to stop discrimination against Latins and Europeans. Leguizamo he's only concerned about Latins, of course, but I'm including Europeans to point out his hypocrisy and Hollywood's hypocrisy in general. Why does it seem like every left-wing leader is a sociopathic mass murderer? It's weird. It's like they like the ideals of these left-wing philosophy, I guess. But then you look at the actual leaders that come to power and like, oh, they're monsters. It's weird that you'd still push this ideology, which results in practically speaking, it's like the philosophy may be great, but in the real world, it results in mass starvation and sociopaths coming to power. It's like Stalin, Castro, I don't know, Papa Doc, Pol Pot. It's like, oh, that wasn't the real thing. Maybe it'll work different next time. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of ideologies. You could look at that and say maybe it'll work different. If we were in charge, it would work different. Don't you think it's weird that you see all the European characters replaced by specifically African characters? There's a whole list in comics and movies where they swap out red-haired characters usually, and sometimes blonde-haired characters. It's whoever is kind of like uber at the top of the European hierarchy, at least in their minds. Like, what's the whitest of the Europeans? In their minds, it's going to be blonde-haired, straight blonde-haired, blue-eyed. Some Aryan skiing chalet stereotype. We saw those movies in the 80s. Those were great. Bikini ski school with a bunch of hot blondes, or red-haired or something. Like, these people are, they have this weird strawman view of the world. Like, they're stuck in these beliefs, because like everything they know, they learn from some insane globalist professor who's just dripping poison into their ears. Like, if you go to college, go get a STEM degree. It's the only thing that's worth it. So, like, you see that in movies and comics. It's specifically red-haired characters are being swapped out for Africans. Latin American population is twice the African population, or about that. Yet black actors are massively overrepresented on screen, and Latin American actors, or Latinos, it's almost totally invisible. And he's talking about in front of the camera, but behind the camera as well. And it's like, you're just not Latin or European, you're just not going to get representation unless you form identity groups to advocate for yourselves with power. Individuals don't have power, but groups do have power. # form militias. So Hollywood, like, it talks about the importance of representation. Obviously, that is a complete lie. If they wanted to include Latin actors, they would have to exclude themselves, because it's a zero-sum game in that regard. Yes, there are more streaming shows, so there's more positions out there, but those are for much less money than a movie, or even the audience reach of the older TV model, which is like, those days are gone forever. And back in the day, people used to be on the same page in regards to a TV show, and it's actually kind of interesting sociological phenomenon, because America is not on the same page in regard to pop culture anymore. Everyone is listening to these little micro echo chambers and microcosms, which is good for us because it decentralized authority, which, like, if you have a central dissemination of the narrative, then it's easy to subvert it and control it, which is what TV has been doing since the 60s. But now we have all these alt platforms. And, every minute you're on Odyssey, Bit Chute, or these other platforms hearing someone else's perspective, you're not hearing the mainstream centralized pre-approved message from Big Brother. You're hearing, like, there's only 24 hours in the day, and if you're spending a half hour on Odyssey lifting the Odyssey videos, well, that's a minute you're getting an alternative perspective that you're not getting from these mainstream people, which scares the hell out of these mainstream people, because it's kind of this split between the left and the right, is a split between centralized authority, controlled by these puppet masters, or decentralized dissemination of information, which we are all on board with. So, things are looking up in that regard. The point is, like, people used to be on the same, like Dynasty. It was that the guy it was all a dream as he gets out of the shower, or something like that. That was before my time, but like what percentage of the country knew what dynasty was if you were around, I don't know when that was, in the 80s or something like that. It was like, it was a huge population of America that could, you know, sing beer commercials to you from the Super Bowl because so many people were watching it. That kind of stuff is all over. I mean, there's like, people are on completely different pages now. I think that kind of started about 20 years ago with HBO and Sex and the City and The Sopranos, maybe. Anyway, so these people aren't, like, just not familiar with stuff. It's kind of it has its ups and downs. Anyway, but back in the day, because of that model, they were able to create these huge stars with massive name recognition. And nowadays, like, there are more smaller stars, like on reality shows and unscripted shows. I guess those are cheaper to produce. You probably, you know, I don't know if you're not paying, if they're not in the Film Actors Guild or anything like that. See what I did there? So, thanks, South Park. But they're way lesser known. Like, in their head, some reality TV star might be a star now with like a few million name recognition, where, you know, 30 years ago it would have been, you know, Brad Pitt was known to half the country. Anyway, Black Hollywood is tribal and advocates for themselves as a tribe. Latino and European Hollywood has got to do the same if they want to get that Hollywood money. Even to form underground networks where you quietly only hire each other. So you end up with, like, most of the people on the set, you know, from all different positions on the set. You might have a Latin set or a European set, because you really don't have a choice. You're getting screwed right now from this big Hollywood machine, which doesn't have to represent, it doesn't have to listen to you because you don't have representation, because you don't act as a tribe. It only gets worse. And if you're counting on an external Hollywood to come save you, like external Hollywood machine to suddenly treat you fair, if you're Latin or European, it's like, well, they don't treat you fair now, and it gets worse every year. Why do you think they'd suddenly turn it around? They have no reason to turn it around. You have to turn it around by acting in your own interests. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe. Check me out on Subscribestar and the more base videos on Odyssey and Bit Chute, and I'll see you guys all next episode.